I'm Laura. I'm 27 years old, and as you might guess, I have a story to tell. But before diving into the details, let me introduce you to the main characters of this tale. First, there's Gabriel. He's my boyfriend, an incredibly sweet and caring guy. We've been in a relationship for 2 years, and although we sometimes argue like any other couple, we generally get along very well. Gabriel is a man with a smile that could light up an entire room, and his laughter is contagious. He's a good man, and that's what matters most to me. Then there's Mateo, my nephew. He's 18 years old, a smart and energetic young man. His mother, my sister, passed away a year ago, and since then, he's been living with me. I've taken on the responsibility of caring for him, and though it can sometimes be challenging, I want the best for him. Now, let me tell you how their lives and mine intertwine in a twist that even I didn't see coming. Gabriel and I began our relationship with the typical excitement of any new couple. Everything was thrilling, full of surprises and adventures. We fell madly in love, and for a while, it felt like nothing else mattered. But over time, as often happens in any relationship, the novelty began to fade. Passion turned into comfort, and the initial spark started to wane. Don't get me wrong, Gabriel is still amazing, and I love him with all my heart, but we felt like something was missing. That initial excitement was no longer as intense. We were both working a lot, and our lives had become routine. Mateo, on the other hand, was a constant source of energy and fun. Despite his youth, he shared a special bond with me. We laughed together, shared secrets, and had deep conversations. Often, when Gabriel had to travel for work, Mateo and I spent time together. It was as if he filled a void I didn't even know existed. It was during one of those moments when we were alone that something more began to happen. I felt a spark, a special connection that went beyond being an aunt and nephew. I noticed Mateo felt the same from the way he looked at me, with an intense, deep gaze that seemed to be asking me for something. After that moment when I noticed Mateo's look, things started to change. Every time Gabriel left for work and we were alone at home, the atmosphere became more tense, more charged with something I couldn't define in words. Mateo became more attentive and closer. Every time I bent down to pick something up or turned around, I felt his gaze fixed on me. It was an intimidating feeling, a shiver running down my spine. And what unsettled me even more was that I didn't feel the need to look away from his gaze. It seemed like every conversation, every interaction had a different tone. We laughed as before, but now the laughter was loaded with hidden meaning, a connection neither of us dared to openly explore. The most disconcerting thing was that Mateo no longer seemed like a boy but a man. His voice had a deeper tone, his body looked more defined, and his eyes were full of desire. How had it come to this? How could I be experiencing this forbidden attraction towards my own nephew? We came closer and pulled away, like two magnets attracting each other, but fearing the inevitable collision. We tried to hide what was happening, knowing it was wrong in every sense. Sometimes, our conversations became awkward, our silences uncomfortable. The tension grew day by day. At times, our casual touches became more intimate, a touch that lasted a bit longer than necessary. A hug that lingered more than it should have. We knew we were playing with fire, that this secret game could ruin our lives, but the attraction was irresistible. When Gabriel went to work and Mateo and I were left alone at home, the tension increased. Every moment became an opportunity for our feelings to overflow. Even when I tried to ignore what was happening, I constantly felt his eyes on me. One of the things that disconcerted me the most was the feeling of being watched while I slept. In the afternoons, when I lay down, I felt that intense gaze that seemed to follow me even into my room. How could this be possible? Was my nephew watching me while I slept? And then, there was one time that marked a before and after in the house. I was in the shower, oblivious to the outside world, when suddenly, the curtain was abruptly pulled back. I froze, and there was Mateo, with a surprised expression on his face, as if he had entered by accident. "I'm sorry, Laura. I didn't know you were here," he said quickly, withdrawing and closing the door behind him. But something in his look told me it hadn't been an accident. It had been secretly planned to happen at just the right moment. And that only increased the tension between us. Every time I talked to Mateo, his eyes never stopped looking at me, and it wasn't just a simple look. It was a gaze filled with desire, a look that made me feel like I was burning inside. It was as if his eyes knew something I was trying to ignore. Mateo spent more and more time talking to me. Our conversations grew more intimate, more loaded. It was as if he knew exactly what to say to keep me captivated. My feelings towards Mateo became increasingly confusing. On one hand, and despite being my nephew, I felt an attraction to him, a desire that consumed me. On the other hand, there was my boyfriend Gabriel, to whom I had never been unfaithful. Sometimes, I thought about putting an end to all of this, about talking to my nephew and ending everything once and for all. But there was also a desire inside me that urged me to continue, something that kept me in this dangerous game. So here we are, moving forward in my story, and things are becoming more complicated, more dangerous. One day, while Gabriel was at work, Mateo and I were alone at home. The atmosphere was charged with desire, as always. But this time, something in the air was different, as if we both knew we were crossing a dangerous line. We were in the kitchen. I was preparing lunch, and he was close to me. Mateo began to flirt shamelessly. It was a dangerous game that neither of us seemed willing to stop. "Laura, you have an amazing way of cutting vegetables," Mateo said, with a mischievous smile. I tried to keep my composure, not to give in to his insinuations. But at that moment, I felt desired. I knew what we were doing was wrong, that I had Gabriel, whom I loved. But something about the attraction I felt for my nephew Mateo was irresistible. "Mateo, we should stop," I said softly, but my words sounded more like an invitation than a rejection. He slowly approached, his eyes fixed on mine. His hand brushed against mine as I held the knife. I felt a knot in my stomach, a mixture of excitement and adrenaline. "Laura, I can't help it," he murmured, his warm breath brushing against my skin. Our faces were inches apart. I knew I was crossing a line I shouldn't have crossed, but my resistance was crumbling. Every part of my body was in conflict, and before I could think clearly, our lips met. It was a fiery kiss, full of desire and longing. I knew I was betraying Gabriel, risking everything I had with him. But in that moment, I couldn't think clearly. We kissed intensely. My hands clung to him, and his arms surrounded me tightly. We were two lost souls in the heat of passion, not thinking about the consequences of our actions. Finally, we separated, breathless, with eyes full of desire. I looked at Mateo, my heart pounding, and knew there was no turning back. "This is wrong, Mateo. We can't go on like this," I whispered, but my words sounded hollow, as if I didn't truly believe what I was saying. He nodded, but his burning gaze remained fixed on me. "I know, Laura, but I can't help it," he said, his voice trembling with the same intensity we felt. That afternoon, we moved away from each other, aware that we had crossed a line from which there was no return. The tension in the air was even denser. The guilt weighed on us, but at the same time, the attraction kept us together like magnets. That night, when Gabriel returned home after a long day at work, everything seemed normal at first glance. The table was set, the food steaming, and the delicious aroma filled the small kitchen. Laura and Mateo were sitting at the table, talking while waiting for Gabriel to arrive. However, for me, that night was anything but normal. There was something in the air, an invisible weight carrying the tension of what had happened between my nephew Mateo and me. As I looked at my nephew, I tried to stay calm and hide any signs of nervousness. Mateo, for his part, was acting with the same naturalness, as if nothing had happened. Gabriel arrived tired, but with a smile on his face when he saw me and his dear nephew Mateo. The three of us sat around the table and began to have dinner. During the meal, Gabriel shared anecdotes from his day at work, and I tried to participate in the conversation, though my mind was elsewhere. Every time I exchanged glances with Mateo, I felt a chill run through my body. There was something forbidden, thrilling, and dangerous about what we were doing, and we were both aware of it. I struggled to keep my composure, but my heart pounded uncontrollably every time Gabriel looked at us. Gabriel, unaware of what was happening under our own roof, continued talking and laughing, suspecting nothing. To him, Mateo was like a younger brother, a boy who needed care and guidance. He couldn't imagine that my trust was silently breaking. The dinner passed in an uncomfortable atmosphere, with awkward silences and forced laughter. Mateo and I were caught in a web of secrets and desires that threatened to collapse at any moment. We both wished for dinner to end soon so we could retreat to our rooms and escape the unbearable tension. Finally, Gabriel finished his dinner and got up from the table. "Well, guys, I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed early tonight," he announced as he headed to his room. Mateo and I nodded nervously and quickly gathered the dishes to clean the table. When we were alone in the kitchen, Mateo and I looked at each other with complicity, knowing this was the moment to talk about what had been happening between us. I began washing the dishes, trying to find the right words to address the situation. Finally, Mateo broke the silence. "Laura, we need to talk about this," he said seriously. "We can't keep pretending nothing is happening." I sighed and set down the plate I was washing. I turned to Mateo with a look of anguish in my eyes. "I know, Mateo. This is a mess. A big mess. I can't believe we've come this far." Mateo approached me and took my hands. "Laura, I know this is complicated, but we can't ignore what we feel for each other." We both knew it wouldn't be easy. There was so much at stake, and the consequences could be devastating. But we could no longer ignore what was happening. The night had come to an end, but things were just beginning. That night, after the uncomfortable dinner with Gabriel and Mateo, I was in my room, alone with my thoughts. The tension in the air still lingered, and my mind was filled with conflicts and doubts. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that was happening in my life. My emotions were a mess. On one hand, I felt guilty about what had happened between Mateo and me. I knew I was betraying Gabriel's trust, the man I loved and had shared these past few years with. But on the other hand, I couldn't deny the intense attraction I felt for Mateo, a connection that had grown uncontrollably. My thoughts turned to Gabriel. I couldn't bear the idea of hurting him in the way I was doing. He trusted me, and I was betraying that trust in a way he couldn't even imagine. I wondered if he would ever find out the truth, if he would be able to forgive me if he did. Mateo also occupied my thoughts. He was my nephew. And even though he was no longer a child, the age difference between us made this attraction even more complicated. What was going through his mind? How had I come to have this desire for my own nephew? I didn't want to ruin his life or the relationship I had with Gabriel. Then, the next morning, Gabriel had gone to work as usual. I was lying on my side, feeling the warmth of the sheets wrapping around me, when, suddenly, soft hands gently embraced me. My first reaction was to think it was Gabriel, my boyfriend, who had unexpectedly returned from work. But when I turned my head to look, I found Mateo's intense eyes just inches from mine. Surprise overtook me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. My heartbeat quickened, and my mind was trapped and filled with emotions. I wanted to tell Mateo to get out of my bed, that this was wrong and inappropriate, but something inside me resisted. A tension charged with desire floated in the air, and we both seemed to be under the spell of an attraction impossible to ignore. Mateo leaned in slowly, his lips meeting mine in a soft yet intense kiss. It was like an electric spark, igniting the passion in both of us. Words were unnecessary at that moment. Our mouths spoke the language of the desire we had been holding back for so long. What began with a kiss quickly turned into wild desire. We let ourselves be carried away by the tide of our emotions, and inhibitions vanished. Our bodies drew closer, and I felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. The room seemed smaller, time stretched, and only Mateo and I existed in that instant. The passion consumed us, and our bodies intertwined in a frenzy of desire. It was forbidden territory, a secret we shared silently. Every caress, every kiss, was a silent scream of need and longing. During that instant, we ceased to be Laura and Mateo, aunt and nephew, and became two lost souls in a sea of passion. The voice of reason tried to break through in my mind, reminding me of what was at stake, the betrayal we were committing, and the damage this could cause. But the burning desire between us was overwhelming, and reason faded in the heat of the moment. Finally, when the fire of passion subsided and our bodies separated, we were left exhausted and breathless. I stared at the ceiling, trying to comprehend what had happened. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, and we were both aware that we had crossed a line we should never have crossed. Mateo broke the silence with a look full of guilt and regret in his eyes. He whispered my name in an almost inaudible tone, as if seeking forgiveness or something. But the words were stuck in my throat, unable to come out. My mind was filled with a mixture of overwhelming emotions: guilt, shame, fear, and desire. I knew what we had done was wrong in every way, that I had betrayed Gabriel's trust and damaged our family relationship in an irreparable way. With a deep sigh, Mateo got up from the bed and began to dress in silence. We were both aware that we couldn't go back and undo what had just happened, but now we bore the weight of our actions. When he finally left the room, I was left alone, feeling like the whole world was crashing down around me. As I stared at the ceiling, I realized everything had changed irrevocably. The consequences of what we had done would cast a shadow over our lives, and there was no turning back. My mind was filled with unanswered questions. How would I face Gabriel? How could we move forward as a family after what we had done? And most importantly, how would we deal with the guilt that would haunt us from now on? After that intense morning with Mateo, I knew I had to make a decision. My mind was filled with questions. I didn't want to lose Gabriel, my boyfriend, the person who had been by my side for so long. But I was also aware that what had happened with Mateo couldn't go on. We couldn't allow this situation to repeat itself. After Mateo left the room, I was left alone with my thoughts and a knot in my stomach. I knew I had to talk to him, to end what had arisen between us, and find a solution to this situation threatening to destroy everything. After hours of turning the situation over in my mind, I made a decision. I knew I had to talk to Mateo and put an end to what had started. We couldn't allow our relationship to move forward on this dangerous path. I needed to protect my relationship with Gabriel, the person I loved and wanted to share my future with. So that afternoon, when Gabriel left for work as usual, I sat down with Mateo in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, and we were both aware that a difficult conversation was coming. I tried to find the right words to explain to Mateo that this couldn't continue, that we needed to end what had happened between us. "Mateo, I need to talk to you," I began, and his gaze filled with concern as he nodded. "What happened this morning was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened, and I know you know that too. This isn't right, and we can't keep going down this path." Mateo lowered his gaze, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Laura. I shouldn't have let this happen." I sighed and continued. "Mateo, I know you're an adult and have your own desires and feelings, but you're also my nephew, and I'm your aunt. This is inappropriate and wrong. Not only are we risking our family relationship, but also my relationship with Gabriel. Mateo nodded sadly, and I knew he understood the gravity of the situation. You're right, Laura. This shouldn't have happened. I don't want to cause you problems. I'm glad you understand, I replied, feeling a momentary relief. Mateo, I need you to leave this house. Go to your other uncle's house. I know he'll take you in. From there, the university will be closer, and you can continue with your life. Mateo nodded again, this time with determination. I understand, Laura. I'll do that. I knew this was the only possible solution. I didn't want to hurt Gabriel, and I didn't want the shadow of what had happened between Mateo and me to keep haunting us. After that conversation, Mateo packed his things and went to his other uncle's house. When Gabriel came home from work, I told him Mateo had gone to his other uncle's house because the university was closer from there. I hid the true reason behind his departure. I didn't want to hurt him or destroy our relationship. And so, Gabriel and I continued our life together. As time went on, the episode with Mateo became a distant and painful memory. Despite the guilt that continued to haunt me, I knew I had made the right decision to put an end to that affair with my nephew. Thank you for being part of this gripping story of infidelity. If you want to continue enjoying and exploring other exciting stories, I invite you to subscribe. Join our community so you don't miss a single video. Click the subscription button to receive instant updates on our upcoming stories. I look forward to seeing you in our next video. Don't miss it, subscribe now and discover a world of fascinating stories featuring Laura, Gabriel, and Mateo.